He challenged the greatest Roman wars, crucified thousands, but his end was so absurd that it seems almost like divine punishment. Did fate charge a price for his greed? At the height of the Roman wars, a man rose with almost limitless resources and a power that few dared to challenge. He was not only able to crucify thousands of prisoners by the roadside, but also turned fires into gold and exploited fear to strengthen his position. Yet his death was so shocking that it echoes as a warning about the consequences of unbridled greed. This is Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest of the rich, who overcame unimaginable misfortunes in childhood and rose again amidst persecution and betrayal. What seemed to be a triumphant trajectory ended up marked by a conclusion of pure irony, leaving a legacy that transcended centuries. Many have tried to understand what truly fueled his ambition, but few have come close to uncovering the price he paid. He is living proof that ascending to the top in the Roman Republic did not guarantee invincibility. However, there is something surprising in this story that can resonate deeply with modern challenges: the pursuit of power and how our own choices can seal our fate. Those who identify with the pains of unchecked ambition will find here not only the story of Crassus, but also reflections on paths and consequences that still echo today. Crassus was born in 115 BC into the powerful gens Licinia. This patrician family, whose influence ran through the highest corridors of Rome, offered him a foundation of privileges few could dream of. From an early age, he was surrounded by political debates, military training, and the promise of a bright future. However, what followed shattered any notion of security. The turmoil of the civil wars between Marius and Sulla, the tragic death of his father and brother, executed by the followers of Marius, was not only an emotional blow, but a catalyst for profound changes in his life. With his properties confiscated, Crassus experienced firsthand the total loss of material wealth. This trauma forged part of his character, awakening in him an almost obsessive desire to reclaim everything that had been taken. Exiled in Hispania, he found refuge and unexpected alliances. The distant land was marked by instability, but also offered opportunities for those who knew how to navigate adverse circumstances. Crassus quickly adapted to the local culture and used his political talent to forge connections that would serve him in the future. While many Roman nobles would lament exile as an irreparable fall, Crassus viewed the situation as a period of preparation. Each friendship formed and each favor granted planted seeds that he would soon reap. In the shadows, he orchestrated his return, keenly observing Sulla's movements and the disputes that stirred the Republic. His youth, marked by deprivation and fears, did not make him any less ambitious. On the contrary, it inflamed in him the determination to consolidate power that no one else could strip away. His contact with soldiers and local leaders in Hispania also sharpened his strategic ability, preparing him for the battles to come. This period of flight shaped Crassus's mindset. Every step was calculated. Every opportunity for profit or political alliance was seized with fervor. He became a social chameleon, able to navigate between adversaries and recompose himself even in the face of threats. The need for survival taught him to be relentless. By the end of his exile, Crassus was stronger, even if many did not realize that he would return to Rome not just to reclaim his former properties, but to ascend to heights never before imagined. And on the horizon loomed the figure of Sulla, whose growing power would ultimately change the political landscape and make way for Crassus's meteoric recovery. Back in Rome in the wake of Sulla's march, Crassus quickly distinguished himself through his ability to exploit every opening in the political landscape. While many feared the proscription lists, citizens marked for confiscation of property and even execution, he saw an opportunity. He bought properties from enemies of the regime for a pittance and sold them for fortunes. Each negotiation boosted his wealth and showcased an unprecedented coldness. His controversial private fire brigade transformed tragedies into highly lucrative ventures. When a fire occurred, his teams would appear quickly, but they only extinguished the flames after Crassus acquired the property for a minimal price. This practice, while morally questionable, was viewed by some as proof of his incredible shrewdness. Crassus expanded his holdings, while simultaneously gaining a reputation as a man who solved problems. He also used this influence to establish strong political connections. He became a financier of campaigns, helping other politicians in exchange for favors and future concessions. In this way, he ensured protection for his interests and kept his name away from retaliation. His fortune generated power, and power further fueled his fortune, a cycle that few could break. The period following Sulla's dictatorship was delicate, with the city seeking stability. Crassus filled this leadership vacuum economically, extending his influence across various sectors. His dominance over urban and rural properties became an undeniable force in Rome. Many saw him as the embodiment of ambition, but also a pillar of reliability in times of uncertainty. At the same time, Crassus cultivated a public image of generosity. He sponsored events, offered banquets for the people, and financed reforms. Although his main goal was to stay close to the masses to ensure support, this posture helped solidify the respect, or at least the fear, that Roman society had for him. He blended financial savvy with political sensitivity like few others. Interestingly, his meteoric rise was not solely due to real estate speculation or schemes involving the properties of the proscribed. Crassus also supported commercial enterprises, being a pioneer of partnerships that involved everything, from grain supply to mining. While other nobles scorned these activities as undignified, he saw them as essential sources of profit to sustain his continued growth. All this economic power would be fundamental for Crassus to take the next step in the military and political sphere. There was a cry in Rome for leaders who could confront internal threats, such as the slave revolt that would soon erupt. This need for a strong hand fit perfectly into the plans of someone who mastered not only currency, but also the art of manipulating situations to their advantage. Appointed commander against the slave uprising led by Spartacus, Crassus found a golden opportunity to demonstrate his strategic capability and reaffirm his military prestige. While other generals hesitated and suffered embarrassing defeats, he marched into combat determined to restore discipline within the Roman legions and crush the rebellion that terrified the heart of the Republic. To regain control over demoralized troops, Crassus resorted to drastic measures. Decimation, a cruel punishment where 1 in 10 soldiers was killed by their own group, became a way to enforce immediate respect. This internal brutality shocked many, but it reinforced the cohesion of the army and created a collective fear of failure. Although questionable, the tactic served as a clear message. Desertion and cowardice would not be tolerated. The construction of fortifications on the Calabria Isthmus was another example of Crassus's astuteness. Instead of confronting Spartacus directly on open ground, he preferred to surround him and deprive him of resources. These defenses, erected swiftly and methodically, proved to be a significant obstacle for the rebel army, forcing them into a defensive position that undermined the initial strength of their revolt. Still, Crassus's greatest challenge was dealing with the charismatic figure of Spartacus. The rebel leader had unified thousands of slaves from different backgrounds, transforming them into a surprisingly effective army. Spartacus demonstrated mastery of tactics and great skill in motivating his people, uniting a heterogeneous group under a single purpose: freedom. The decisive encounter took place near the Saro River, where Spartacus fought bravely but was ultimately defeated. The Roman general then ordered that around 5,967 men, almost the entire captured group, be crucified along the Appian Way. This terrifying scene served as a warning to anyone considering opposing the power of Rome. At the same time, it etched into Crassus's history the image of a man whose determination knew no ethical boundaries. The end of Spartacus brought temporary peace to Rome, but also increased Crassus's prestige. The population, weary of looting and uncertainty, saw him as the hero who restored order. For Crassus, it was confirmation that his military fame could rival that of Pompey, his chief adversary up to that point. This triumph, however, did not erase the brutal methods that made him legendary. With the uprising concluded, Crassus returned to focus on politics, aware that his influence was now unparalleled. His victory over Spartacus earned him recognition from the Senate and popular acclaim. Although he saw this achievement as a passport to even bolder projects, he did not foresee that, in the future, his desire for glory on the battlefield would lead him to face far more dangerous forces than rebellious slaves. The rivalry with Pompey intensified. Soon after, both returned victorious from different campaigns. Despite the tensions, they agreed to govern together as consuls in 70 BC. This uncomfortable union highlighted Crassus's ability to politically maneuver, even though each individual's ego could explode at any moment. While Pompey brought the fame of a military hero from distant theaters, Crassus boasted the feat of having suppressed the Spartacus revolt. The embryo of the first triumvirate arose from ambitions that neither Crassus nor Pompey could realize alone. Julius Caesar, younger but equally ambitious, needed financial support and military influence to implement his popular reforms. Crassus viewed him as a bridge to broaden his participation in politics and enjoy even more privileges. Thus, they joined forces in 60 BC, sealing a pact that, in the eyes of the people, would keep Rome stable. Crassus's contribution proved essential: money to finance campaigns, works, and alliances that would sustain the group's popularity. Pompey provided the prestige of battles and control of legions, while Caesar orchestrated changes that met the people's demands and consolidated his name. From this fusion, Rome found an apparent balance, albeit an extremely fragile one. Despite collaborating, profound tensions marked every meeting. Crassus often felt underestimated. Despite the fact that his wealth was the foundation of many projects, Pompey, in turn, demanded respect for his great military reputation. Caesar, skilled at balancing both, knew he could not show signs of weakness or ignore the sensitivities of his allies. Any disagreement could jeopardize everything. Behind the scenes, Crassus saw the triumvirate as a springboard for personal projects. He desired military victories that would equal his name to that of Pompey and Caesar, since he had wealth in abundance. Observing the growing opportunities for conquest, his eyes turned eastward, where the Parthian Empire loomed as a formidable opponent and a potential source of glory. At the same time, internal tensions in Rome continued to accumulate. Factions in the Senate looked skeptically at that concentration of power, and many aristocrats criticized the way the triumvirate trampled on ancient customs. Nevertheless, Crassus continued to expand his businesses and reinforce his position, knowing that Roman politics was headed for even greater conflicts. The triumvirate, in essence, relied on complementary interests, but the ambition of its members seemed to grow faster than the loyalty that united them. In this scenario, Crassus conceived bold plans that would lead him to an epic military campaign. What he perhaps did not anticipate was that this undertaking in search of conquests and military prestige could become the greatest mistake of his life. Determined to match the feats of Pompey in the east and Caesar in Gaul, Crassus saw the campaign against the Parthian Empire as the perfect opportunity. This venture promised fame, territories, and riches that would strengthen his position, both in the triumvirate and in Roman society. The enemy, however, was not a mere peripheral state, but a consolidated empire that knew exactly how to react to Rome's might. Setting out in 53 BC towards the eastern frontiers, Crassus ignored advice from experienced generals, preferring to rely on the supposed numerical superiority of his legions. That confidence bordered on arrogance. He gravely underestimated the Parthians' combat techniques, which included highly mobile cavalry archers and cataphracts capable of crashing through rigid formations. To make matters worse, his ability to assess the terrain also proved flawed. In open and arid regions, the Parthians moved quickly, exploiting paths that put the Romans at a disadvantage. Crassus, accustomed to traditional war strategies, struggled to adapt the legion's march to a completely different reality. Logistical problems mounted. The long distances between supply posts and the scorching heat beset the troops. Crassus's initial confidence gradually turned into concern. Even though he tried to display firmness, his inability to respond to the Parthian cavalry's hit-and-run tactics undermined the morale of the Roman soldiers. Meanwhile, the Parthians, led by General Surena, proved to be masters at exploiting the enemy's hesitation. They forced rapid skirmishes and relentless attacks, keeping a safe distance from the Roman infantry and attacking continuously with a rain of arrows. Many legionaries fell without even seeing the enemy's face. The brute strength of shields and cohesive formations proved useless against an opponent that did not engage in direct combat. This scenario set the stage for the Battle of Carrhae, where Crassus would face not only an army better adapted to the region but also the fatal consequences of his ambition. Tension reigned in the Roman camps as rumors of desertion and fear spread. The discipline once earned in previous campaigns was no longer sufficient to contain the dread of the unknown. Not even the prospect of seizing immense treasures from the east provided enough solace. Each advance was known to be a step toward risk. Even so, Crassus pressed on, driven by the need to prove his worth and the desire to equal Pompey and Caesar. But his fate was already in motion, and the great turning point of history would occur on the scorching and inhospitable ground where he could never have imagined encountering such a devastating outcome. The harbinger of disaster began with the death of Publius Crassus, the general's son. He led a charge against the Parthian cavalry, but was ultimately cornered and surrounded. The news of his death irreversibly shook the legion's morale, which saw in that loss not only the end of a talented young man, but also a signal of helplessness against a merciless enemy. The barrage of arrows showed no mercy, and the Romans, trapped in an open landscape, suffered with each quick assault. The famed cohesion of the legions mattered little against such light and effective maneuvers. The formations tried to hold their ground, but suffered constant losses, and the sweat of each soldier mingled with growing despair. Experience from other Roman wars proved futile, as this was a new form of combat. Crassus, pressed by circumstances, tried to negotiate with Surena, the Parthian general leading the enemy army. Supplies were running dangerously low, and physical and psychological exhaustion engulfed the troops. All that remained was a fragile hope for diplomatic agreements that in practice rarely materialized in such a disadvantaged situation. When Crassus offered to talk, he was met with calculated betrayal. The Parthians feigned willingness for an understanding, but the real intention was to lure the Roman general and his officers into a trap. The final confrontation was not an epic battle of swords and shields, but a quick, clean strike that ended Crassus's life without the glory of an honorable duel. His death, according to writings by historians such as Plutarch, was followed by a symbolic gesture that forever marked his memory. It is said that the Parthians melted gold and poured it into his mouth, in a macabre allusion to the greed that characterized him in life. This narrative, whether true or embellished, encapsulates the ancient world's view of Crassus, the man whose thirst for power was cruelly punished. As the Roman army tried to reorganize to escape the trap, the damage was already done. Without a leader and resources, the survivors could do little but retreat. The Battle of Carrhae became one of Rome's greatest military humiliations, revealing the vulnerability of the legions against tactics outside the Roman norm. The end of Crassus symbolized the collapse of the balance that the triumvirate had attempted to maintain. If his fall was swift, its consequences would reverberate for much longer, influencing rivalries and paving the way for an escalation of internal conflicts that would lead the Republic to its final gasps. And on the political horizon, Pompey and Caesar would now have to deal with this power vacuum. The death of Crassus immediately signified the end of the first triumvirate. Without him, the fragile alliance between Pompey and Caesar dismantled, giving way to political competition that would soon transform into civil war. The absence of a third pillar of power made it impossible to maintain the balance of forces that kept Rome stable, even if by tenuous lines. Pompey began to see Caesar as a direct threat, while Caesar, bolstered by his conquests in Gaul, saw an opportunity to assert himself. The vacuum left by Crassus proved decisive. He was the element that, by financing and mediating interests, prevented a definitive rupture. Without his gold and influence, the escalation of tension accelerated faster than any attempt at mediation. The streets of Rome, the defeat at Carrhae echoed like a trauma. The image of invincibility of the Roman legions received a harsh blow, and the humiliation before the Parthian Empire tarnished the military pride of the Republic. Many senators and leaders questioned Crassus's insistence on launching the campaign, but the damage was already done. It was too late to blame someone who was no longer alive to defend himself. Crassus's disappearance also had an effect on the local economy. Despite his controversial practices, he injected resources into public works, financed projects, and expanded businesses in the city. Without that injection, certain ventures dwindled, and the aristocracy, which once competed with Crassus in terms of wealth, missed an adversary who, ironically, stimulated the market around him. Symbolically, his trajectory has since been studied as a lesson about how far ambition can take one. He rose from a youth marked by exile to become the richest man in Rome, acclaimed for suppressing the Spartacus revolt, and ended up a victim of his own thirst for glory. The melted gold in his mouth became an emblem of greed punished, almost a moral parable for future leaders. At the same time, the Battle of Carrhae opened a precedent for Rome to pay closer attention to wars outside its traditional model. The humiliation forced some generals to innovate in tactics and think beyond the standard legion cohesive formation. It served as a warning for future confrontations, proving that the Roman army was not infallible, especially against peoples who mastered combat strategies specific to their regions. Thus, Crassus not only influenced his time, he left a mark that would trigger profound changes in the political, economic, and military directions of Rome. His fall closed one chapter, but paradoxically paved the way for new transformations that would accelerate the decline of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. So concludes the story of Marcus Licinius Crassus, a man who used every trick to amass power and wealth, but met a cruel fate in his pursuit of military recognition. Reflecting on Crassus's journey is to understand how ambition can be both the force that drives us and the abyss into which we can fall. The suggestion remains for everyone to share their impressions. Was greed Crassus's greatest error, or the trait that distinguished him among figures as powerful as he? In the comments, share your views on how this story resonates in today's society, where limits and possibilities continue to intersect in surprising ways. Crassus's strength still echoes, as his memory serves as a reminder that, behind every victory, there may be a bitter price to pay, and sometimes that price is paid in gold or with it melted.